In this video, we're going to talk about serverless architecture and how it has brought us a new way to deploy our apps. And because we're practical programmers, I did my homework so you don't have to. And we're starting right now. My name is Ryan and welcome to my channel Practical Programming, where we talk about code, business and software. Now, if this is the kind of stuff you're into, please click the subscribe button and the bell icon right next to it so you don't miss anything. Before we start, let me tell you a story back when I was looking for my first full-time freelancing gig. I had this interview with a startup, and you guys know how I feel about startups. But this one was different, in a very practical way, as they were turning a profit, which changes everything because basically they have the means to pay you now, and I really like to be paid. So here I was in this cafe in Paris, and sitting across the table with the two co-founders, the sales guy and the product guy. Their CTO was about to leave the company, so the sales guy was trying to pitch me to come and join them. And this is how the sales guy pitched me the tech stack. Okay, right, for us, quality is very important, and the former CTO did a great job implementing the MVP.
We are running on a microservice architecture deployed on AWS Lambda serverless with the API gateway and Swagger.
The worst part in this is that it made sense. I'll tell you why. But before we start, let me tell you about serverless and what it is. Also known as function as a service, serverless architectures allow you to run your scripts as written as functions directly into a cloud computing engine without writing anything, any server code, any routing, any backend whatsoever. Your functions are being called depending on some event hooks that could be set up directly from the engine of AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, or some other serverless providers. When you try to write code local in your local machine, it's going to be hard to simulate the same parameters that is given to you using the cloud functions. Whether it's Google Cloud or Azure or AWS, it's not the same parameters. You don't get exactly the same things, so you have to work with it. And then comes the deploy time. When you write something, let's say you deploy your app and there's a small error. You want to check it out, where the bug could be. So you put a console log somewhere. You then have to save your function. It takes some time, a couple of seconds. And then you have to run a test again. Again, it's going to run a couple of seconds. So you waste a lot of time. It doesn't mean like, it doesn't look like a lot, but when you add up, every time you have to stop, test, redeploy, you waste a lot more time trying to develop on a serverless architecture directly into the cloud than developing locally. Unfortunately, I haven't found any viable local environment that would simulate the remote environment, whether it's in Google Cloud or AWS. Another problem that could come up using serverless is pricing. Basically, if you're a case like this startup trying to build a whole app using serverless, pricing could jump through the roof. Although it's free to begin with, I think for AWS it's free for like the 400,000 seconds. As soon as you get through that threshold, you get to be charged quite expensively. So yes, you do save some time and some resources not having to develop either a backend nor to handle the deployment. But there's also some other products that could be much cheaper, like AWS Beanstalk or using Heroku, that requires you to build a small backend server, but you can get away with a lot cheaper infrastructure costs. And finally, the last problem that I have identified with serverless is the vendor lock-in. Because yes, it does integrate very well with other cloud service. For instance, the API gateway, the messaging system, the database that they provide, especially for the serverless architecture. Everything is built for you to be locked in with their service. It works very well, it's very easy to implement, but then once your product is up and running and you do have some traffic, are you going to take the risk to take it down and put it back up using a more traditional architecture? Maybe, maybe not. So I think they are hoping for you to just leave it there as it is, and unless you get some very big traction and hire some people to rebuild this product using a more traditional architecture, you're going to stay there longer than you might need to. So you might be wondering, when should we use serverless? Well, it's going to depend on what type of app you're building. If you're building, for instance, a Slackbot or a chatbot in general, if you're building an Alexa skill or Google Home's equivalent, If you're building anything related to IoT, serverless might be interesting because you get to deploy only your code related to what your app or service is doing. You don't have to worry about anything, whether it's deployment or it's backend, spinning up a server, the routes and anything. Everything could be handled outside of your code. So you get your app up and running in no time, and most importantly, you don't have to worry about scaling. Let's say, for instance, that your app is relating to some sporting events and it blows up during the Super Bowl. So during 3 hours, you get a lot of requests. If you have built it using a traditional server, you would have to think of setting on the auto scaling, and probably something could go wrong that's outside your business code. Using a serverless, you're charged by the second, so you don't have to worry about any of this. Everything is handled for you, and your app could spike up. You're going to be charged for this, of course, but then the minute your app is stopped being used, everything goes back to normal, and you're not being charged anything. Whether if you're building a more traditional web service with more traditional cloud architecture, you would have to manage this either with auto scaling or have forecasted some resources for your server to be up and running for so much traffic. It's also good if you want to prototype something very quickly, even a web app or a mobile app. On the other hand, there are some cases where you really shouldn't be using serverless. For instance, if you already have some backend skills, you could spin up an AWS Beanstalk or a Heroku, spin up a real quick Node Express server or Ruby on Rails server or something that you're familiar with, and really be up and running in no time. You don't have to abstract everything and use a serverless. Also, if you're building a product that has a lot of asynchronous code, because you're being charged by the second, you don't want to be waiting every time there's a function being called. It's also not ideal if your app that you're building requires a lot of memory space. So to wrap things up, it's pretty easy to get started with serverless. You basically have nothing more to learn if you're a backend developer. If you're a front-end developer, you're gonna have to learn a little bit about incoming requests and how to handle them, how to get your data from it, but you should be ready to get going in no time. I hope you like this video. If you have any question, any comment, please put it down below. I love to interact with you guys, so let me know what you think. Until next time, keep coding.